Snow whispered across the dry earth, like a ghost remembering the living. It brushed against the wooden siding of Clara McAllister's cabin, rattled the window panes, and crept under the door with the breath of something not entirely natural. Winter had come early to Dry Creek, and it brought nothing with it but silence. Clara stood at the edge of her porch, her hands tucked into fingerless gloves, the hem of her black coat stiff with frost. Her eyes were fixed on the horizon, where gray sky met gray earth, unbroken but for a crooked fence line half swallowed by the snow. Her face was hard to read, calm, but in the way of someone who had learned not to show anything at all. 3 years since her husband died, and not once had Clara spoken to another man longer than a handful of words. She didn't need to. The townspeople respected her distance, or maybe they feared it. Some said she was cursed. Others called her the ghost bride. Always in black, always alone, always walking that stretch of land between her cabin and the cottonwood tree where she buried him. There was no gravestone, just a wooden cross he'd carved before the war, meant for his brother, but left behind when he rode off to fight the cattle barons. She buried him beneath it when the bullets found him instead. Since then, her days had followed a quiet rhythm. Feed the mule, patch the fences, sew leather for the trader in town, and walk to the tree at sunset. She didn't cry anymore. That had ended after the first winter, when the crying gave her nothing but cracked lips and the taste of salt she couldn't afford to lose. Today, something different stirred in the air. She felt it before she saw it, some disturbance in the wind, in the stillness. She squinted into the distance. Something moved across the ridge. At first, it was just a shadow, a smear of motion breaking the flat line of snow. Then it grew taller, darker, more defined. A man on horseback, large, moving slow. His silhouette was strange, as if the horse beneath him was too small, or the man too big. His hat was wide-brimmed, his coat heavy, and he rode like he didn't care if the world watched him arrive. Clara's heart ticked faster, but she didn't flinch. She never did. Instead, she stepped down from the porch, snow crunching under her boots, and waited. The rider came closer. She recognized the mule before the man, her own, old Baynard, trotting beside the stranger as if the two had been companions for years. She narrowed her eyes. The mule had slipped the fence again, and now here it was, following a man built like a mountain. He stopped a few feet away, didn't dismount. His eyes, half shadowed by his hat, met hers without hesitation. He looked younger than she expected, maybe late 30s, but time had carved deep lines in his face, lines that didn't come from age, but from the kind of things you see when no one else is looking. His coat was dusted with snow, his gloves patched and worn. His horse, a thick-chested bay, panted quietly, steam rising in the cold. "Your mule was halfway to nowhere," he said, voice low and rough like gravel under a wagon wheel. "Figured I'd bring him back before he froze." Clara didn't answer right away. She studied the man. His tone wasn't mocking, wasn't polite either. Just matter of fact. There was no attempt to charm her. That, oddly, made her want to trust him more. "Thank you," she said at last. He nodded once, then swung off his horse with a slow, deliberate movement that made the snow crunch louder than it should have. He was taller than she thought, easily 6.5 feet, broad shoulders, arms thick like he'd wrestled oxen. Not fat, just built. His presence changed the air around him. "I'm looking for shelter," he said, "just till the pass clears. Name's Wyatt Harrow." Clara took a breath. The name meant nothing to her. No alarm bells rang, but something inside her shifted. It wasn't fear. It was recognition of a kind she didn't yet understand. This was a man with a weight on his back, same as her, and the snow didn't care whether he carried it or not. "I have a barn," she said. His eyes didn't leave hers. "That'll do." She led him around the side of the cabin, unlatched the barn door, and watched as he unsaddled his horse with the ease of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. He worked in silence, but not out of awkwardness. It was just how he was. Deliberate, still, like a tree rooted deep into the earth. Once the horses were settled, she turned to go. "I don't take charity," he said, voice following her like a low drumbeat. "I didn't offer any. You'll have my labor while I stay. Fence needs fixing. Roof's leaking." She looked over her shoulder. His eyes were serious, steady. "I'll think about it," she said, and returned to the house. That night, Clara lit only one lamp. The wind howled outside, tugging at the walls. Inside, the air smelled of old tobacco and pine ash. She sat at the small table by the stove, hands wrapped around a tin mug of weak coffee, staring into the flickering shadows. She tried not to think about the man in her barn, but his presence crept in like the snow, quiet, insistent. Outside, the horses were still. No creaking wood, no crunch of boots in the snow. Only the long, patient silence of people who knew how to wait. The next morning, Wyatt was already up, hammering something by the chicken coop. She watched him from the window, not moving. He didn't glance her way. She didn't ask why he was out there before dawn. Didn't ask what he was running from, or if he planned to stay longer than spring. But when she went out an hour later with hot biscuits wrapped in cloth, she handed them to him, without a word. He took them, nodded once. "I'll patch the north fence next," he said. She only nodded back. The town wouldn't understand. They'd whisper again, louder this time. The ghost bride and the giant stranger. But Clara didn't care about the town. The town didn't patch her fences. The town didn't stand quiet beside her pain. This man hadn't asked for warmth, but he worked like he meant to earn it anyway. And Clara, for the first time in 3 years, left the black veil hanging on its hook. By the second week, Wyatt Harrow had repaired Clara's fence, reinforced the chicken coop, and chopped enough wood to last through February. He never asked for thanks, nor lingered after the work was done. He simply moved from task to task like a man trying to outrun his own thoughts. Clara watched from the window most mornings, arms folded, breath fogging the pain. She didn't tell him what to do, but he always seemed to know what needed fixing. He slept in the loft above the barn, and Clara brought him supper each night, cornbread, stew, salted pork, whatever she had on hand. They didn't speak much, but the silence between them no longer felt like distance. It was something closer to understanding. One evening, she found him sitting on a hay bale, sharpening a knife by lantern light. The blade glinted like ice, and his face was set in quiet concentration. He didn't look up when she stepped inside. "You always working?" she asked, her voice soft but clear. He paused, met her eyes, then resumed the motion. "Helps me think." "About what?" He hesitated. "What I've done. What I didn't." Clara sat across from him, placing a folded cloth with 2 biscuits and a wedge of cheese between them. "You're not the only one with regrets," she said. "I didn't think I was." A long moment passed. The wind outside clawed at the barn's eaves, but the lantern flickered steady. "You lose someone?" he asked, not unkindly. "My husband. 3 winters back." He gave a slow nod, setting the knife down beside him. "I lost a family once. Not mine by blood, but might as well have been." She didn't ask what happened. He didn't volunteer. But something shifted in the way they sat, closer, somehow, though the distance hadn't changed. The next morning, Clara found a leather bridle on her porch. New, handmade, clean stitching. "Yours," Wyatt said when she held it up. "Your old one was worn through." She didn't smile, but her eyes softened. "Thank you." He shrugged, adjusted the collar of his coat. "I had time." Time, Clara thought, was something they both had too much of and too little for. The days bled into one another, each one marked by chores, muted conversations, and the occasional shared glance that lingered too long. One night, the snow came heavy, burying the path between house and barn. Clara stood at her window, squinting into the darkness, heart tight with unease. She hadn't seen Wyatt return. The wind had picked up, sharp enough to peel bark from trees. She lit her lantern, wrapped herself in a wool cloak, and stepped out. The snow swallowed her boots, bit into her legs. Her fingers curled around the lantern's handle as she pushed forward, eyes searching. The barn door creaked open, wind slamming it against the side of the building. Inside, she found him asleep on the floor beside his horse, wrapped in a blanket too thin for the cold. The air smelled of sweat and hay, and Wyatt's breath came in short puffs. She stood over him, anger flickering low beneath her ribs. "You stubborn fool," she muttered. He stirred, eyes blinking open. "You all right?" "I should ask you that. You'll freeze out here." He pushed himself up, rubbing his neck. Didn't want to impose. "You're 6.5 feet tall. I'd notice." He offered a crooked half-smile. "Fair." She hesitated, then turned. "Come on. You're sleeping inside tonight, just by the fire." He didn't argue. He followed her like a shadow, tall and quiet, brushing snow from his shoulders as he crossed the threshold into her home for the first time. The warmth hit him immediately. He stood in the doorway, blinking at the lamplit room, as if unsure he was allowed to be there. Clara motioned to the chair near the fire. "Sit," she said. He did slowly, lowering himself as if afraid he might break the furniture. She brought him a towel and a mug of something hot, weak tea, but warm enough. He drank in silence. She sat across from him, folding her hands in her lap. "This house hasn't had a man in it since the day I buried mine," she said. Wyatt nodded, setting the mug down. "I don't want to replace what you lost." "You can't." Her eyes met his. "But you're not him. And I'm not the same woman either." He leaned back slightly, boots near the fire. The crackle of flames filled the space between them. "I was an enforcer once," he said suddenly, "for a man named Cormac Tate. Did bad things. Thought I was keeping peace, but all I did was leave scars." "Why'd you stop?" "There was a boy, 10 years old. He ran at me with a broken bottle. Thought I'd come to kill his father. I didn't shoot him, but I could have. Should have walked away long before that. And now, I've been walking ever since." Clara studied him. The weight in his words was real. Regret didn't pour from him. It bled slow, like an old wound reopened every morning. "I don't need saving," she said softly. "I didn't come to save you," Wyatt replied. "I came because I needed somewhere quiet enough to hear myself think again." They sat for a long time without speaking. Outside, the wind calmed. Inside, the fire lowered to glowing coals. When he stood to leave, she didn't stop him, but she placed a folded blanket in his hands. "You'll sleep here, on the floor by the stove, just until the storm clears." He nodded once, grateful without words. As he lay down, she returned to her room, door half open. That night, for the first time in 3 years, Clara slept without dreaming of blood in the snow. And downstairs, a man who had once ridden with devils closed his eyes to the quiet sound of winter breathing through the walls of a place that might, if he stayed long enough, begin to feel like forgiveness. The snow didn't let up for 3 days. During that time, Wyatt barely left the cabin. He kept to the floor by the stove, rising early to stoke the fire or sweep the snow from the porch. Clara moved around him with practiced stillness, neither cold nor especially warm. But their silence had changed. It no longer carried the weight of strangers. Now, it was the silence of people who knew what not to say. On the 3rd night, Wyatt rose from his makeshift bed and sat at the table where Clara was darning a sock by lamplight. He held a small wooden object in his hands, carved, simple, and shaped like a horse. She didn't look up. "You carve?" she asked. "When my hands itch and there's nothing to fix." He set the figure down between them. It had no saddle, no reins, just a wild, wind-blown stance. "It's free," she said, running her thumb over its back. "I guess that's what I was trying to make." A quiet passed. "Ever think about leaving?" he asked, not looking at her. "I have." "Why didn't you?" She tied off her thread. "Because I buried everything I loved right here. If I leave him behind." He nodded. "That's loyalty. Or maybe punishment. Maybe both." That night, she left her bedroom door cracked a little wider. Not enough to invite, but enough to notice. The next morning, the snow had thinned into slush. The air was warmer, the sky pale and shifting. Wyatt saddled his horse early, said he was riding into town for supplies. "You sure they'll sell to you?" she asked. He smirked. "They'll take my money. They don't have to like my face." He returned late, just before dusk, a sack slung across the saddle and a furrow between his brows. Clara met him at the porch. "Their problem?" "Old friend saw me." She crossed her arms. "What kind of friend?" "The kind I used to ride with." The words dropped like stones. She didn't ask for details. He didn't offer names. "Do I need to worry?" she asked. "Not tonight," he said. "But I think trouble just marked the map." She stepped back so he could pass. That evening, Wyatt cleaned his gun slowly by the fire. Clara watched him, remembering the first time her husband had done the same. It had terrified her then. Now it was something else, an old dance, familiar and necessary. "He told me I couldn't outrun what I'd done," Wyatt said without lifting his eyes. "Maybe he's right." She spoke after a long moment. "You're not running. You stopped. That counts for something." He looked up at her. "It does to you." "I wouldn't have let you in if it didn't." He holstered the gun and set it beside his boot. Later that night, a soft knock at the door broke the quiet. Clara froze, hand instinctively going to the rifle above the hearth. Wyatt stood, took the weapon without a word, and moved to the door. Outside stood a man with a black beard and an oilskin coat, dusted with frost. His eyes were too bright, his smile too easy. "Wyatt," the man said, tipping his hat. "Heard you were dead." Wyatt didn't answer. Clara stood behind him, quiet but unmoving. "Bo," Wyatt said finally. "Thought I'd stop by. You know, for old times." Clara's voice cut through the tension. "You want something?" Bo's eyes slid to her, amused. "Just saying hello. And reminding our friend here that ghosts don't stay buried forever." Wyatt didn't move. His hand stayed near the rifle. "You said your piece," he said. "Now go." Bo stepped back, smile still in place. "You're living soft, Wyatt. Just remember, softness gets cut the quickest." He walked off, leaving no footprints in the frozen ground, only a deeper chill in the air. When Wyatt closed the door, he turned to Clara. "He's not just talk." "I figured." "You want me gone?" "No," she said, "but I want to know what's coming." He sat down slowly, weariness creeping into his movements. "Bo Sutter. We rode together for 2 years under Cormac Tate. Bo liked blood more than money. I left when he killed a man's wife in front of him to send a message." Clara tightened her jaw. "And he followed you all the way here?" "Not on accident. Word spreads fast when a man like me disappears." Clara poured 2 mugs of coffee and handed him one. Her fingers brushed his. "If he comes back, I shoot first." Wyatt studied her, and something in his face softened. "You don't scare easy." "I've already lost everything once. What else is there?" The days that followed passed under the shadow of Bo's visit. Wyatt repaired the roof with more urgency, kept his rifle close. Clara cleaned the spare pistol and practiced in the backyard until her aim was steady again. They worked like people expecting a storm, but there were moments between, moments not shaped by fear. One afternoon, Wyatt showed Clara how to split kindling with a single swing. She laughed when her first try sent the axe glancing off the log and into the snow. He laughed too, a real laugh, rough and surprised. Later, while brushing down the mule, Clara glanced up at him and said, "You know, you talk less than any man I've met." "Is that a complaint?" "No," she said. "Just means I listen more." He smiled, then looked away, as if embarrassed by the way her voice lingered in the quiet. That night, as the fire crackled low and the world outside lay still, Wyatt stood beside Clara by the window. The stars were clear, bright pinpricks in the velvet dark. "You ever think about having children?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. She blinked at him, surprised. "I used to. Before. And now. I stopped believing in second chances." He turned to face her fully, his expression unreadable. Then, with a calm certainty that didn't ask, didn't beg, he said, "By winter, you'll have my child growing inside you." Clara's breath caught. Her eyes searched his face, looking for jest, but found only sincerity. She didn't speak. Not right away. Instead, she reached out and took his hand in hers, fingers threading together like pieces of a lock, finally clicking into place. And outside, unseen, a lone rider watched the cabin from the ridge, smoke curling from the chimney. 2 shadows cast in firelight. Trouble hadn't left. It was only waiting for the right moment. The morning after Wyatt's vow, Clara woke to the sound of chopping. The sun had barely crested the horizon, but he was already outside splitting wood like a man preparing for war. She watched from the window, arms folded, her expression unreadable. A part of her wanted to question what he'd said the night before, to dismiss it as a momentary dream, but deep inside, something had shifted. The idea had taken root. Not fear, not doubt, but the quiet bloom of possibility. She opened the door, the cold brushing against her face. Wyatt paused mid-swing, turning toward her. His breath rose in clouds, his face flushed from exertion. He said nothing, only studied her as if waiting for her to speak. Instead, she walked over and picked up a stray log. "You missed one." He smiled, the smallest curve of his lips. "Guess I did." Together they stacked wood, side by side, saying little. The silence between them had grown into something sturdy. It didn't need filling anymore. Later, while boiling water for washing, Clara saw him oiling his rifle on the porch. There was a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there the day before. Beau's presence lingered like smoke, staining the air. "You think he's coming back?" she said. "I know he is. What does he want?" Wyatt didn't look up. "To remind me who I used to be. To make me pay for walking away." Clara stirred the pot slowly. "Will he try to hurt me?" "If he thinks it'll get to me, yes." She nodded once, as if confirming something already understood. Then she wiped her hands and fetched her husband's old revolver from its box under the stairs. She laid it on the table, heavy and clean. "I know how to use it," she said. "I don't doubt you." That night, Wyatt didn't sleep on the floor. He stood by the window until the fire was low, then crossed the room and stopped beside her chair. She looked up at him, steady-eyed. Without a word, she stood and led him down the short hall to her bedroom. There was no desperation, no trembling urgency. Only two people choosing, for the first time in years, not to be alone. At dawn, hoofbeats thundered down the path toward the house. Clara rose from the bed before Wyatt, pulling on her coat and boots with practiced speed. He followed, shirt half-buttoned, eyes hard with knowing. By the time they stepped onto the porch, 5 riders had already spread out across the snowy yard. Beau Sutter sat at the center, reins loose in his gloved hands, a grin splitting his bearded face. "Morning," he said cheerfully, as though calling on a friend. Wyatt didn't return the pleasantry. "You've had your warning." Beau tilted his head. "Thought I'd give you one last chance. Ride with me. You and I. There's still dust to raise, roads to burn. Don't need to die forgotten in the snow." Wyatt stepped off the porch. Clara didn't stop him. She followed a step behind, revolver tucked in her coat pocket. "I'm not dying here," Wyatt said, "but I am done riding with devils." Beau's smile faltered. "You always were soft at the core. Should have let you bleed out in Carson." "Maybe, but I didn't." Beau's hand drifted toward his hip. Clara's eyes locked onto it. The moment stretched, cold and still. Then, everything happened at once. One of Beau's men moved first, raising a rifle. Clara fired before Wyatt could, her shot clean and fast. The man dropped with a grunt, slumping into the snow. Wyatt's gun cracked next, striking another rider in the shoulder. Chaos broke loose. Gunfire echoed through the valley. Horses screamed. Boots thudded in the snow. Wyatt moved like a storm, deliberate and unrelenting. Beau dismounted, crouched low behind a tree stump, returning fire with cold precision. Clara kept low, reloading quickly, her pulse steady despite the panic clawing her ribs. A second of silence followed, broken only by the wind and the ragged breath of the wounded. Then Beau stood, gun drawn, and aimed straight for Clara. Wyatt saw it a moment too late. He shouted her name, leaping between her and the bullet. The shot rang out, and Wyatt stumbled back, clutching his side. Clara screamed, raised her revolver, and fired once. The bullet hit Beau square in the chest. He staggered, eyes wide in disbelief, then crumpled into the snow like a puppet with cut strings. The silence that followed was complete. The remaining 2 men rode off without a word, spooked by the sight of their leader motionless in red-stained frost. Clara dropped to her knees beside Wyatt, hands pressed to the wound. "Stay with me," she said. "You hear me? You're not leaving me now." He grunted, jaw clenched. "Hurts less than I thought it would." You're not dying. I know. Her hands trembled as she pressed cloth to his side. Blood soaked through fast. She looked around, mind racing. We need help. Wait. She froze, looking down at him. He reached up, touched her cheek. I meant what I said. By winter. She bent closer, forehead to his. I know. He passed out then, body slack but breathing. Clara dragged him inside, stoked the fire until it roared, boiled water, cleaned the wound with what little they had. He stirred once during the night, eyes unfocused. She whispered to him, every word an anchor, tethering him to the world. By dawn, the fever hadn't come. His breathing was steady. She sat beside him, exhausted but unbroken, watching the snow fall outside with a quiet fierceness. A week passed before he could stand, 2 before he could walk. By the 3rd, he was mending the porch rail with one arm, refusing to rest longer than necessary. The threat was gone. The blood had washed away, but the scar remained, on his side and in her heart. Spring arrived with a sudden burst of green. The thaw came fast that year, softening the earth and loosening what had been frozen too long. Clara walked with Wyatt along the edge of the cottonwood tree, her hand resting over the place where new life stirred inside her. He said little, but his eyes were always on her, watchful, reverent, awed. She had been a widow. He had been a ghost. But now, together, they were something else. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned gold, Wyatt sat carving another figure, a cradle this time, smooth and simple. Clara watched him from the doorway, her belly just beginning to show, her eyes bright with the knowledge of what they had survived. The past had not vanished, but it no longer ruled them. And somewhere out there, beyond the hills and the fading trails, the world kept turning. But here, in the quiet heart of Dry Creek, something new had begun, something strong and full of grace. The wind howled low through the dry pines, carrying the scent of blood and gunpowder as the last echoes of violence faded from the widow's land. Clara knelt beside Wyatt, her hands trembling as they pressed against his shoulder, blood seeping through her fingers. He winced but said nothing, his jaw tight, eyes locked on hers as if memorizing her face in case the darkness closed in for good. You're not dying. Not like this, she whispered, voice rough and urgent. Not after everything. Wyatt gave a broken chuckle, the sound edged with pain. Ain't planning to. Doc Merritt arrived minutes later, breathless, hauling his old leather bag. He didn't waste words, just got to work. Clara and Wyatt both silent as he stitched and cleaned, the lantern casting flickering gold over the bloodstained floor. The children watched from the stairwell, wide-eyed and pale, clinging to each other. By morning, Wyatt was fevered but alive. Clara hadn't slept. She sat beside him through the night, brushing damp hair from his forehead, whispering words she hadn't let herself feel until now. I thought I was done, she said, voice soft, almost afraid. After Jed, after everything. I thought I'd buried any part of me that still knew how to want more. His eyes cracked open, bloodshot but steady. Then let me remind you, he murmured. I never came here for just shelter, Clara. Days passed. Wyatt recovered slower than he liked, but he didn't fight it. Not when each hour gave him more time in her presence. The homestead no longer felt like a place holding its breath. It pulsed with life again. Both Sutter's men never returned. Sheriff Calhoun, once reluctant, now rode out with deputies and took Wyatt's side after seeing the wreckage. The town began to whisper about the widow and the giant cowboy who'd faced down the outlaw clan and lived. But none of that mattered much to Wyatt. What mattered was the way Clara laughed now, freely, with color in her cheeks. The way she walked out to the pasture barefoot some mornings, trailing the children, looking at the land like it had a future again. One evening, with the sun spilling orange across the sky, Wyatt stood behind her at the fence line. She didn't turn right away, but she knew he was there. I planted seeds today, she said. Corn and squash. Couldn't help thinking how something broken still finds a way to grow. Wyatt nodded slowly, stepping closer until their shoulders touched. He glanced down at her belly, then back to her eyes. By winter, you'll have more than crops growing, Clara. You'll have my child inside you. She looked at him then, tears springing but not falling, voice catching. And you'll stay. He cupped her face gently. "There ain't a force in this world could make me leave." And in that moment, under the vast, forgiving sky, the past lost its grip. The widow wasn't alone anymore, and the cowboy finally had a home.